Welcome in to another episode of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we have a couple of games to discuss. So we're going to break down Alabama's massive win over Vanderbilt that happened on Tuesday evening, and then we are going to break down the LSU basketball game that's going to be retro night, happening on Saturday night at 7:30 in Coleman Coliseum, and then we will get out of here. So first things first, let's talk about the Vanderbilt game. Alabama wins this game by a score of 103-87. For those of you that may have missed it, the box score may have made it look like it was a bigger blowout than it was. At times in this game, Alabama had complete and utter control. It felt like Alabama really could do no wrong. In the second half, there was some lapses in defense that you don't love to see. Vanderbilt hit some open shots. In the second half, they actually shot pretty well from three. And that led to the score actually getting down to single digits at one point, and then Alabama opening it back up to the score that we finished at. Mark Sears hits a bunch of free throws at the very end of the game, and they kind of just salt the game away. Oddly enough, Mark Byington actually takes a timeout with about 30 seconds left, causes Nate to drop a play for a home run shot for a wide open dunk, and just kind of, to kind of finally salt the game away and Alabama to win by the score that they win by. This game honestly went about as I expected. I thought that Alabama's pace of play was going to be the difference. I thought that Alabama was just going to have enough offense, and I thought that in general they were going to be more careful with the basketball and not turn it over as much, and that seemed to come to play. Alabama has 11 turnovers in this game. Vanderbilt has 10. Those numbers, due to the fact that you had 82 possessions in this game, you're not super upset with that, right? We talk about Alabama's turnover numbers are always going to be a little inflated from what some other teams are. If you can keep it under 10 to 12 turnovers, you're doing okay just due to the quantity of possessions that Alabama has. And even the turnovers that happened, there were not a ton of live ball turnovers. A couple of the turnovers that happened, there actually were 3 charges called, which you don't see called super often, especially with the rule change, which Nate mentioned. There were a couple of other moments, and actually one of the turnovers led to one of the more impressive plays of the day that saw Aiden Holloway get his second block of his career. First block at Alabama in a 3-on-1 scenario. It was kind of a odd scenario, kind of the last scenario you thought you would see Aiden Holloway get a block. But turnover leads to a 3-on-1. Aiden is the one and somehow, comes down with the block, just stellar defense. And, we'll kind of start with Aiden. Aiden played just an absolutely incredible game. The bench, by and large, was the difference in this game, right? We talk about Alabama's depth, and that, had to be used again. In the last episode, I mentioned that I thought Darian Reed might play in this game. Nate had mentioned in Hey Coach that, worst case scenario, Darian would be playing on Saturday, and it looks like that is what's going to end up happening. Darian did not play in this Vanderbilt game, so we will look to see him in the LSU game in some sort of limited capacity. We'll talk about that when we're breaking down the LSU game. But Darian doesn't play, so we're down to the 9 scholarship players again. And, part of the big difference in this game was Alabama's bench was just incredible, right? We had really, really good minutes out of Aiden Holloway, out of Muhammad Diabate. Chris Youngblood hit a couple of threes. Aiden Sherrill, honestly, didn't do a ton from a scoring perspective, didn't score. I was the only guy on the team that didn't score, but, had 5 rebounds as well as 2 offensive. Had a couple of assists and, played pretty well in his minutes. I was really happy with what I saw out of him, but when you look at the bench and who really contributed, there was none bigger than Aiden and Muhammad Diabate. In the first half, Aiden literally could not miss. There were a lot of comments made where I've spoken about it, and Nate has spoken about how with Aiden Holloway, he opened him up to take a few more floaters in the lane and a few things, around the rim. Not just your traditional layups that you kind of think of when you think of an Alabama offense, just because of how efficient Aiden has been. And, that kind of kept going. In this game, Aiden shoots 4 of 5 from 2 and then 4 of 6 from 3. And, in the first half, he doesn't miss a shot, has 16 points, and really was kind of a huge piece of how Alabama was able to do what they wanted to do. He does a really, really good job of pushing the pace. He does a really good job of, getting assists. In this game, he actually only had the one assist, but he does a great job not turning the ball over and, just does a really good job of taking what the defense gives him. And I thought that he did a great job of that in this game. And just hitting, like I said, hitting open shots, getting to the lane, taking the floaters, taking the layups when he has them, and just not trying to force the envelope, not trying to do too much with the basketball. I thought that he was really, really good in that sense. Then your other benchmate, you have Mohamed Diabate, and I know a ton of people are going to talk about him, but just because of the game that he had, right? Modi has a double-double. He plays 23 minutes, 22 and 10, 2 offensive rebounds, had 2 blocks, had a steal, a very vintage Mohamed Diabate game. Another hard hat won by Modi, not super surprising at all. If he plays enough minutes in most games, he's going to win that hard hat award. But the thing that really kind of impressed you the most about Mohamed Diabate in this one was actually his offense. Modi ends up going 8 for 9 from 2, 6 of 9 from the free throw line. So honestly, not terrible from the free throw line. You'd like to see maybe 1 or 2 more of those made, but not terrible. But just as an offensive option, back to the basket and how he was able to take advantage of mismatches and score kind of at will when he had the matchup that he wanted, really showed his skill set on the offensive end. And it actually was asked about in the post-game press conference, and Nate Oates mentioned that apparently Modi had done so well in practice a couple of weeks ago that they installed some plays kind of specifically for him that is now named the off-road package. And it seems that that wasn't exactly what was actually being called in this game. From what Nate said, only one of them was actually called for him. But it was kind of a moment that Alabama realized that Modi has a skill set where he's too quick that a traditional big, like a Cliff or Grant could even guard him. And he's too physical for most guards. From when he was going up against our team, the only guard that was really able to stay with him is Chris Youngblood, a guy that has some size on him, has a lot of time in college basketball. But he was really the only one that had enough size and enough quickness to kind of stay with him. This really makes him a mismatch for a lot of defenders, right? And that's something that he was able to take advantage of in this game. It's something that I think I expect to see Modi take advantage of when he's in a little bit more often. Similar to when we've been talking about like a Jaron Stevenson, right? Whatever Nate told him about being more aggressive on the defensive end and being more aggressive on the offensive end. You've seen him cut to the basket a little bit more. You've seen him go for a few more blocks on the defensive end, right? Aiden Holloway, Nate opens up his ability to do a few more floaters, and you see him kind of open up his repertoire inside the arc, not taking a ton of mid-range, but doing some more floaters in the lane and things like that, right? It really feels like as these players get some, I would say, understanding from Nate, hey, you are able to do this, then it's something that goes well, right? And that ends up being something that they kind of add to their game and something they're comfortable with doing because they know they're not going to get pulled if they do it. So that's what I would say, when it comes to like a Modi and Aiden Holloway. I thought that they were not the only guys that played really well in this game. I thought Mark Sears obviously played really well. You kind of look up, he scores 20. We talk about that a lot, that Mark Sears kind of can just get 20 points kind of at will. He does hit 2,500 career points in this game. Just a really, really awesome accomplishment from the guy from Alabama. He got a standing ovation. There was an odd moment in this game that Mark missed 3 free throws in a row. Oddly enough, it were the only 3 free throws he missed the entire game. Just like kind of a really weird kind of situation there for a odd stretch. Mark misses 3 free throws. Then Chris Youngblood actually misses 2 free throws after not missing any the entire season. There was just some poor free throw shooting. I'm not super concerned about it just because of who was missing the shots. I thought that you had the guys you wanted to take the shots on the on the line, and just for whatever reason, some guys that don't typically miss a ton missed a couple. I'm not super concerned about that. If it's something that keeps going on and on and on down the line, maybe you need to look at it, but I wouldn't think it's anything that I would be too concerned about. The thing with Mark Sears also, he had 7 assists to 0 turnovers, right? That's something that we've seen Mark get better at over the course of this season, is that assist to turnover number. And as that assist to turnover number continues to get better and better and better, I feel like the offense gets better with it, right? As he understands how to attack the offense, how to attack the defense, and how people are going to be closing out on him, and how he can use that to his advantage, I think it makes the team better, and I think it makes him better as well, right? So I think that's something that we expect to see kind of here moving forward. I thought another guy that really played a great game was Jaron Stevenson, right? We talked about him. Jaron played a really good game. He was cutting to the basket. He ends up with 7 rebounds. He does go 1 of 2 from 3. I thought his 3 that he missed was actually a great 3-point shot. I really thought it was going in. He really feels like he's getting better in his role and understanding, like, cutting to the basket and stuff like that, right? He's not just feet in the sand, ready to be a set 3-point shooter. And I think that now that he understands the role that he can play, whether it be from a rebounding standpoint, whether it be from a physicality standpoint due to his height and size, I think that he's become a better player because of it, right? He's also making a few more threes. I'm not saying he's an elite 3-point shooter or anything, but he's making enough threes that, it's back to the point where you're playing him also due to that shooting ability, not just, where he's standing there, he takes 4 threes, and that's the only shots he takes the entire day. If you look at his line, he goes 3 of 4 from inside the arc, 1 of 2 from outside. Right, so you're completely okay with that. He finishes with 10 points and 7 rebounds. You get that every day out of somebody, then you're really happy. The only other one I would note is like Cliff Amore. I thought Cliff played an okay game. Not his best game, but he did have 4 blocks. Cliff did have a little bit of an issue where he got fouled, or I guess technically he committed the foul and got elbowed kind of in the sternum. Nate was checking up on him. He did leave this game for a little bit, did come back. I don't suspect it's going to be anything major due to the fact that he did return in this game, but that's just something to note from an injury standpoint, something that kind of happened. I thought that for Vandy's credit, I thought that they played fairly well. It's like they didn't turn over and roll over and just let Alabama beat them. They were, like I said, Alabama was up by 17 at the half in this game. Vandy ends up actually winning the second half by 1 point. But there were moments in this game where Vandy was really throwing counter punches and was hitting open threes, partially due to Alabama's lack of closeouts and some poor issues on defense from Alabama's standpoint. But Vanderbilt was taking what Alabama gave them and was making the most of it, right? This is a Vanderbilt team that I fully expect to win some more big games. I know they just beat Tennessee, but I think that this team is good enough to win some games in the NCAA tournament, is good enough to beat some teams in the SEC that maybe you wouldn't suspect. They absolutely are a good enough team. I thought that in general, they kind of showed that Alabama had to play at that potential and play at what we were capable of if you wanted to win this game, right? If Alabama had not played at their potential and had not played at the level that they were capable of, I think that Vanderbilt very much could have won this game. I thought that Alabama had to take a step up on defense and on offense at certain moments in this game due to Vanderbilt coming back, and really credit to them, right? I think Mark Byington has done a really good job with Vanderbilt, and like I said, I do expect them to win some games that you may not expect moving forward. They are going to be a team in the SEC that will beat somebody outside of just Tennessee, right? They're going to beat somebody else that you would not expect them to beat, right? Not just a rivalry game, but somebody else that you wouldn't expect them to beat. I fully expect Vanderbilt to win that game. So it's going to happen, right? They're going to be a tough out in the SEC tournament. They're going to be a tough out in the NCAA tournament. And I think just in general, it's a pretty good team that can do a lot of things. So that's what I have to say about Vanderbilt. Like I said, Alabama does win this game. Alabama does pretty well in this game. Like I said, there were a few moments where it felt like Vanderbilt was coming back. Tyler Nickel hits 5 threes in the second half. Vanderbilt does, some damage in the second half, but Alabama is able to kind of keep them at arm's length the whole time. Like I said, Vanderbilt does cut it to 8, and then it really feels like Alabama, puts their foot on the gas, also steps up from a defensive standpoint a little bit, and Alabama comes back, wins the game by 16 due to some good free throw shooting, and just kind of salts the game away. So that's what I have to say about that game. Like I said, really great game. Was great to see. The attendance was not terrible, wasn't as great as you would really hope. But for a midweek game in which a lot of schools around the area were closed due to snow hitting, southern Alabama and such. There was no snow in Tuscaloosa, no ice, but it was cold enough that it wasn't super unexpected that the crowd was a little worse than we had previously anticipated. I do expect there to be a really, really good turnout for this LSU game upcoming, and we'll talk about that next. So moving over to LSU, LSU is a pretty good team overall. They have not had a great start in the SEC, and they are currently sitting near the bottom of the SEC. But they are a team that absolutely can beat people, right? They had a win against Kansas State earlier this season. They had a win against Florida State and UCF earlier this season. They have dropped some games, Pitt, SMU. They've lost 4 in conference to Vandy, Missouri, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. They do have a win over Arkansas. None of those losses are terrible. They're against some of the better teams in conference. Worst loss by 12 points. Not the worst loss ever. So LSU is a team that would not surprise you if they could put some things together and maybe win a game or two that you wouldn't expect. But they probably will finish, closer to the bottom of the SEC. Ken Palm currently has them projected to go 4-14 in conference. We will see who those wins end up being. Currently, you'd look at like a South Carolina or an Oklahoma, an Arkansas, maybe a Georgia, maybe a Texas, right? Some of those games are some that maybe you would see a win, but it's definitely a game that Alabama still needs to, play to their potential because anybody in this conference can beat you, right? I think that Vanderbilt showed you that, right? Vanderbilt not at the top of the SEC, but, Alabama took a couple of moments off, it really felt like, and they really come back on us, and Alabama has to, kind of step on the gas to get back out to the lead. So really that's what it tells me about this team, and about this league this year is that if you don't play to your potential, any team can beat you. So that's what Alabama has to know, right? I do expect due to that Ole Miss game, and we talked about it for the Vandy preview, because of that Ole Miss game and dropping a game at home, I do think that the team understands, hey, even though Ole Miss was a good team, you still have to play to your potential, right? The Southeastern 16 guys actually broke it down talking about Alabama the other day, and we're talking about, if you look at the home games that Alabama has played this season, their scoring at home has been in conference 105, 107, 64, 103. Right? Oh, sorry, the 105 was South Dakota State. But still, the point remains, right? Alabama has scored 100 points in 3 of the games at home and then has the 64-point outlier, right? Obviously, the 64 points partially due to Ole Miss having some decent defense, partially due to our offense just not playing well at all, turning over the ball a lot. But really, showing that a lack of focus is the difference, right? The outlier when Alabama did not play to their potential shows that Ole Miss could beat you, right? This is another team in LSU that their defense is better than their offense, right? Is their defense as good as Vanderbilt or Ole Miss? No. But their defense is still pretty good, right? It's currently sitting at 51 via Ken Palm. They're 16th in effective field goal percentage. They're actually pretty good at 2-point percentage defense. They're 11th in the country. We've talked about how Alabama is an elite 2-point percentage team. So that is something kind of to note, is that they are good at the place that Alabama is also good. So that's maybe a spot that you're going to want to look at in this game. That both teams are elite from the 2-point field goal percentage. One One thing I will say about LSU, and I think that definitely has hurt them this season, is they had an awful non-conference. Currently sits at 340 per KenPom. I think that as we've seen, from the team like in Oklahoma or somebody, that really shows to that, hey, maybe you have not gotten your team ready for what the really slate of SEC play is going to be. But what that also means is as the team comes through a few games, they understand, hey, maybe this is what it takes to compete at the highest level, right? Because LSU is another team that has a decent number of transfers. They do have some guys that have played for them before, but they do have some transfers like Cam Carter, their leader from Kansas State, Jordan Sears from Tennessee Martin, and they have others, right, that play massive roles for them and that were not previously on LSU or previously in the SEC. And that matters a lot when you have such a poor non-conference slate because sometimes it gives your team an artificial expectation of how good you are. And then when you get into a conference as good as the SEC, it really hurts you, right? Because then you get against teams like an Alabama and Ole Miss and Mississippi State and just the game in, game out grind of what it takes to win in the SEC, and you start taking some lumps. One thing I will note that's important about this is LSU actually had the midweek off this week, right? Alabama played a midweek game against Vanderbilt, but there were 4 teams that did have midweeks off. Alabama's midweek off is coming up at the beginning of February, or the second week of February. But LSU did have the midweek off this week, and so Alabama will be playing a team that's had a little bit more rest than them, potentially been able to clean up some things that they struggled with in the early part of the slate. So I would expect that LSU is going to be a little bit more prepared than they potentially were in some of these other games, going to have a little bit more fire to them because they've been able to prepare, right? They've been able to extra prepare for Alabama, to do extra cleanups of maybe what caused them some problems in some of the previous games. So I think that is something that to kind of note. Do I think it's going to be a difference in the game? No, but I do think that at the beginning of this game, it's something that Alabama needs to note is that LSU may have, prepared that little bit more that they could because they didn't have the midweek game to potentially stop them in preparation or stop them in cleanup, right? So that is something to kind of note for this game that is a little different when you're facing somebody off a bye when you're not. I think that overall this game is going to be one that could be pretty fast. I think that similar to most games, I think this is going to come down to, is Alabama able to force their pace of play? I think that Alabama has done an incredible job this season of any team that's, thinks about running, Alabama just ramps it up to 100 and absolutely forces that tempo, the number 1 tempo team in the country. I think a lot of that has to do with having the multiple guards that we're able to play with Philon and Sears and Holloway. Chris Youngblood able to force the tempo a little bit more than we typically, have been in years past. We've always been a fast team, but this year's team, it seems like we get out and run even that little bit more. I think that really helps to our transition play. That really helps to our 2-point percentages. LSU is a team that has a couple of big guys like Jalen Reed and Derek Fountain, guys that have played for them for a little bit that are 6'10". They also have a Robert Miller that's 6'10". So they have a little bit more size than some of the other guys that we've played against this season. That is something to note. That they're going to have a little bit more size. So potentially when you're looking at from a 2-point perspective, that may be part of why their 2-point field goal defense is a little better. I would expect them to try to run Alabama off the line. They've done a pretty good job this season of that. They currently are 75th in the country at running teams off the 3-point line. I will say some of the KenPom numbers may be a little odd when it comes to LSU, just due to the fact that their non-conference slate was so bad, right? When your non-conference slate is that bad, you've played enough teams that potentially has impacted what your actual numbers look like. So if I switch to just SEC offense and defense, LSU is currently 12th in the conference in defense and 13th in offense. If you look at the numbers, they have done a really poor job at turning over the ball. They are 15th in conference in turnovers. They're 14th in conference at offensive rebound percentage. They have not done a good job on the glass. They are an elite free throw shooting team this so far. They're currently 6th. Again, going back to that tempo thing, they're currently 6th in conference in tempo, so I do expect Alabama to be able to bump up the pace in tempo and be able to get out and run with these guys, and typically that helps Alabama from a fast break points perspective, from a potential just getting, into people's bench where Alabama has the guys to be able to swap in and out. You see Nate do platoon swaps, so I do think that could be something you could potentially see. From a defensive perspective, they've actually been one of the worst three-point percentage defensive teams in the entire SEC, currently giving up 38% from deep. Again, another really poor rebounding team at 13th in defensive rebounding. So this is a team that if you look at just the conference numbers and don't look at the numbers over the course of the whole season, due to the fact that their non-conference was so poor, the numbers do shake out to a point where Alabama probably is going to have some success on the glass, right? The offensive rebound numbers don't look that bad. They currently are 63rd in offensive rebound rate. But when you move it over to the conference slate against the 5 teams they faced, part of that is they did face A&M, which is, as we know, one of the better offensive rebounding teams in the entire country. But at the end of the day, LSU has done a really poor job rebounding, right? And that's against the better teams that they faced this season. So that is something really to note when you're looking at things like that is I think that LSU, because of that non-conference slate, is just not going to be prepared to face a team like Alabama. I do think that they're going to be better prepared just because of that week of preparation and not having the midweek. So I think that they're going to be able to give us a little bit better shot than they would if they had a midweek game. But I do think that Alabama at home is going to be just too much. Another thing I will note about this game just before we get out of here, and I'm sorry it took me this long to mention it, but Alabama's going to be rocking some new jerseys for this game. I actually wore this jersey for the podcast for this reason. So this was last year's jersey that they came out with for College Game Day that week, and it was the home alternate. It says Crimson Tide, number on the front. Basically, the jerseys that they're going to be playing in for Retro Night this week are going to be the inverse of this. So they're going to be red with the white lettering, white numbers. So they're just going to be the exact inverse of this jersey that I'm wearing right now. So that's what the guys are going to be wearing. They're going to have the block A on the shorts. So that is the jerseys that you're going to see that Alabama is going to be rocking for this Alabama LSU game for Retro Night. I do expect the crowd to be better doing to it being a Saturday night game. I think that there's going to be a lot of people out at this game. So I do expect there to be a really good crowd for this game. I do also expect that Alabama, as I mentioned, is going to have the fire to them. They got embarrassed against Ole Miss, and they're not going to want to have that happen again. And then again, LSU just having the really poor non-conference and having a poor start to the conference slate, quite frankly, I think it's just going to be too much for LSU. I think that Alabama is going to be able to force the tempo. I think that Alabama is going to be able to rebound. I think that Alabama is going to be able to control the pace of this game. I think that Alabama wins, and honestly, I think that Alabama wins fairly large. I think that Alabama probably breaks 100 for the 4th time. I don't know what it is, but a team like LSU that has such a poor offense, and it's not the worst offense in the country or anything, but when they have such a poor offense, typically that leads to a type of game where the shooting is bad and then Alabama gets out either on offensive rebounds or maybe they turn over the ball a little bit more. LSU is actually one of the worst in the country at giving up the ball on offense, giving up steals, giving up turnovers from their offense, right? So if Alabama gets a few turnovers, gets some rebounds, and gets out and runs with the basketball, that typically bumps up that pace of play a little bit. And when Alabama is free-flowing and playing like that, they typically shoot better, they typically play better, and then your home crowd with the new jerseys, with everything involved in this game, I actually do expect Alabama wins this and wins this fairly large. My prediction for this one is actually going to be like 102 to maybe like 78. I think that, like I said, I do think that Alabama actually wins this game fairly large just due to the things that I mentioned. Like I said, I don't think that LSU is prepared for a team with the firepower that Alabama has. I think that Alabama is going to be able to kind of blitz them, and winning on the road is not easy in the SEC, as you well know, but I think that it's going to be even worse in this one, right? I think that because of Alabama's pace of play and because of what Alabama is able to do with the basketball, I think that Alabama's just going to be able to shoot well. They're going to be able to kind of clean up some things. You're also going to see Darion Reed coming back to give us an extra set of fresh legs. As we continuously push that pace and stuff, you get an extra guy to be able to move in and out. I think that certain guys are finding their role in the offense. We talked about Mo D. We talked about Aiden. The other Aiden, Sherelle, I thought that did a really good job. And so I think that overall, just everybody's kind of finding their place in the offense, especially with the injuries and such. I think they're playing really, really well together. And I think that the loss kind of woke the team up. Nate talked about it. As long as you use the loss to kind of build on and learn from, it's okay. And I think that's exactly what happened. So, like I said, I do expect that Alabama wins this game. I think that Alabama wins fairly large. Like I said, I'm going to go with a prediction of 102-78. If you are interested in more content, I am going to put out a thread. It's going to come out Saturday morning, breaking down LSU from a player's perspective, what the numbers actually look like from a, individual shooting perspective and such. So follow me over on Twitter if you are interested in that. Please subscribe to the channel if you like these videos. There will be a breakdown and preview coming out on Sunday, previewing the next game that is going to be against Mississippi State. I'm still trying to decide if I'm going to be in attendance for that game since it is a late game, but it's only about an hour and a half here from Tuscaloosa, so I may be in attendance for that one. But thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.